Welcome to the LitChix podcast. We are Mary Ellen Humphrey and I am Susan Landrigan. We're coming to you from the Innovation Studio at Lakeshore Center for the Arts in Westfield, New York. Today we're going to discuss writing your life story, memoirs, and legacy books. And I'm in the process of writing one. This is my binder, and I've got it separated into chapters so that I can go and revise and edit single chapters as I go along.
What is the working title?
Becoming Susan.
I like that.
Yes.
Becoming Susan. So this is your story.
So this is what I think the book is going to look like. And yeah, that's my story. And some of the chapters don't go in chronological order because they just can't, because they're different subjects. So I've separated them, put tabs in, and then I can just edit.
This is an excellent
chapters as I go along.
That's an excellent process for writing a book, because now you have everything together, and you can work on whichever part you feel like, which is really good. So about 4 or 5 years ago, the Lakeshore Center for the Arts started this writing program. And the very first thing we did was a 6-week memoir writing workshop. And I was the facilitator for that workshop. And so I thought we could talk a little bit today about writing your memoir, which is kind of what you're doing here.
And I never made it to that workshop, so I joined the writers group after you were done with that.
Well, you know, maybe we should do it again. I'll talk to we could do it instead of 6 weeks, maybe a 2 or 3 week version, because we all know each other pretty well now, and we could do the highlights, because writing a memoir is a specific genre to write, but a lot of the skills and organization that you're doing here could apply to any kind of writing. But there's a little bit of a difference between a memoir and an autobiography.
Okay.
So a memoir tends to look at a specific event or thing in your life. So it might be, and I have some examples here. There's a memoir that was published, I think it was about 3 years ago, called Educated. It was written by Tara Westover, and it was a New York Times bestseller. I read this memoir at the time, and I found it extremely interesting. She's writing about growing up in a kind of strict religious family, home, community, and that's the topic of her memoir. So she doesn't diverse into other topics. She keeps everything focused on this one criteria, this one piece of her life. And I'm sure she has a whole lot of other pieces, but this book is an example of a memoir. There's a lot of wonderful books out there. In fact, if you search memoir, you will find some really interesting ones. Now, sometimes a memoir is written by a famous person just because their name sells, you know.
Yes.
But in a case like this, you have someone who has a unique story. And a lot of us in our life think, you know, I have this unique experience. Maybe I should write about it. If you can focus that in and make your story about that topic, then you can create a memoir. Tobias Wolff, who's a famous writer, of course, he wrote a memoir called This Boy's Life. And his memoir is looking at growing up with a single mom and traveling around and all the things that happened during his growing up, but the focus is on him, his relationship with his mother, and his experiences in this growing up environment. And he said in his introduction, memory has its own story to tell. So this is something that we talked about a bit in our class, and it's something to think about, because I hear this a lot. You have siblings who grow up in the same family, and one sibling writes their story, and the other sibling says, "Well, it wasn't nothing like that. I didn't experience that."
Right.
Yeah, and so memory has its own story, or you have your own story. Your experience with what was happening around you is unique to you. That doesn't invalidate anyone else's, and theirs does not invalidate yours. So memory has its own story to tell, and if you want to write your memoir, you write your story. You don't worry about
what other people will think of it.
What they think of it or how they experienced it. It's your experience. And so that's a key ingredient to a memoir. So I see you have some other...
Okay, this is a biography that I wrote of my after my mom passed, and the reason I decided to do it is because my granddaughter was at my house in Florida when we lived there, and she loved to look through photo albums, and she loved to point people that she knew out. But every time she got to a picture of my mom, she had this quizzical look on her face.
Yeah.
Who is that? I don't know that person. So that's why I decided to write the biography, which was partially written by my mom before she died, and my sister helped with that.
Oh, nice.
And I just expanded upon it because she had all the early stuff was pretty much written down somewhere, and I just expanded on the later things. And and it's more a biography, not a memoir. It's just pretty much facts.
Yeah. Well, I had a friend stop by the other day, and she said to me, "Oh, I'm so bored. It's winter. I have nothing to do. All I do is watch TV. I'm so bored." And I said, "Why don't you write something? Or get a hobby. It doesn't have to be writing, but get a hobby. Do something creative, and you won't feel so bored." But here's what I want to say about writing a memoir. It might be the only thing you ever write. Not all of us are going to sit down and write books as a hobby or a profession or whatever. But you can write your story. And for those who may be watching this, you may want to write your story, your memoir. Don't be afraid to start doing that. Just begin with a journal or your photo album, your grandmother's photo box with all the pictures. Remember how they used to say this? My grandmother had this round
I still have
box
a
full
big
of photos.
box.
And sit down and go through it and let it spark memories. And write those down, because especially for us in our age group, we're starting to think about when we're not here, what do we want our loved ones and friends
to know,
to remember about us? And so a memoir is a really good way to do that, and especially if you have something unique you wanted to let people know. We all go through some things. I wrote a memoir, kind of an interesting perspective. It's called My Mountain Friend. And this is about my 10 years of hiking a mountain where I lived. It was a small mountain, about 2,100 feet to the summit. But I did that hike over 1,000 times over that period of time. And I asked myself this question, well, what's unique about that? Because in New Hampshire, where I live, there's all kinds of mountains to hike, and people check off all the ones they hike. But I hiked the same one. And I realized there was a difference, because I listened to them and their stories. They were exploring, they were learning new things, they were seeing new peaks, and all of those trails were a new experience, but I was doing the same trail. And so that sparked this memoir called My Mountain Friend, Wandering and Pondering Mount Major. And I share in this book some pretty intimate things that I was dealing with, so they were personal, but I did it.
Sort of walking and thinking about
processing.
life at the same time.
You can process things that are challenging you. You can figure out, why is this person acting this way? Or why did this happen to me? And how do I internalize something?
I've done that too.
Yeah, and being outdoors, it doesn't have to be hiking a mountain, but walking and getting fresh air and filling your mind with all of the things that nature has to offer, I found very, very therapeutic. And so I did write this memoir, but you can read this book for not just my personal story, but for all the perspectives about hiking this very special mountain. And
you had special trees along the way too.
I did, and I have
and special rocks.
And I have a thing with trees. Well, I don't want to say preview. I will be talking about a tree book fairly soon. I'm working on, but yes, I kind of connect. I think, and I think other people do too. I'm not unique in that. That I first did that when I was a child playing in the wilds of Maine. I grew up in rural Maine, and what I did is run around with my brothers and climb trees and ride bikes and all these things, and I thought of myself as kind of a tomboy, but I guess I'm really not. I'm just, I just had to do what was available. There weren't any girls around, so I ran around and climbed trees.
Play is important for kids.
It's very important, and imagination, and probably my imagination ran away with me, but I did feel that trees were more than just a plant sticking out of the ground. And now we know scientifically they connect underground in networks. They help one another. They send messages. You can perceive noise from little electrodes put onto them.
Well, I'm excited for the book to come out.
Yes.
And for the new book.
Yes, it's called Plant People, and I kept that title. It was a working title, but it actually ended up working very well. And the subtitle is A Sentient Tree and Her Human Friend. So it's a fun little book. Not a big deal, but a fun book. And of course, as we get older, I like to write books that are my contemporaries. So my group in this, my characters and main characters and so forth are in our age group for the most part. So
retired,
yes. Trying to say it delicately. So I wanted to just share a couple of things about memoir. So memoir is not necessarily an autobiography. It's more of a story about something that's particularly important, or something unique, or some part of your life that you want to condense into, here it is, here's this story. You can sit down, if you're not sure about this, you can sit down and do some brainstorming, or like I said, go through some photo albums or talk with family members. It's a wonderful thing to do if you have girlfriends or friends and you get together for tea or you go out to lunch and you say, I'm 72 years old, I want to leave a book for my family about this experience that I had. And then maybe you can spark this little group that you help each other, you read each other's stories, you provide some feedback and say, well, this isn't clear, but how about if you add this? And you can really make this into something that you're proud of. So I want to just encourage you, all of you who are listening, to read a couple of memoirs and think about what you might like to write. And don't be afraid to do it.
I love reading memoirs. It's one of my favorite genres to read.
Yes, me too. I think a lot of people do, and there's a lot of them on the marketplace. So with that, maybe in a future podcast we can talk about how you take that book that you've written and actually produce it for hardly any cost at all, a few dollars. So maybe we can talk about that in the future for folks who are wondering, I do all this, but then what?
Then what, yes.
We'll do a then what in the future.
All right. Well, maybe we should go on to the word for the day.
Okay. What have we got?
We have rendition. The act or result of rendering something. That thing may be a performance or interpretation, a depiction, or a translation.
Well, that really fits well with the idea of memoir.
It does.
Because you're rendering from this whole big experience your piece of that.
Yes.
Yeah, and your interpretation of it.
Yeah.
And your depiction of that's really perfect. I like that rendition. I wonder if it could be used, Mary Ellen's rendition. So you gotta think creatively here. So I sometimes think of a rendition as a song or something. How somebody interprets it. Their rendition of.
Right. Because so many songs can have different renditions.
Yeah.
Or different.
Well, you think about songs and the lyrics of songs, and you think about poetry, and you think about writing, and this is all using language to render what's in your mind onto a piece of paper so the other person can, or through the air as a song, so the other person captures that rendition that you have. So that's a really fascinating word to think about.
Yes.
I'll spend some time today rendering what rendition means.
I need to work on more renditions for my memoir.
Well, that sounds like a fun thing to do.
It is, yes.
And a good way to fill in those times in the cold winter when you feel bored, right? I never get bored. I have too many stories calling to me.
Well, that's a good thing.
Yeah. Yeah, or cats.
All right.
So are we good for today?
I think we're good for today. Thank you for spending time with us today. We value your feedback, and we'll see you next time.
And happy writing.